How does the Samsung Q990B compare to the Q950A, and have they fixed the major flaws of last year's model? Hey team, I'm Josh. In this video we'll figure out whether the Q990B is right for you, and my recommended settings for getting the most out of this bar. I've also created a sound test file for you to download, which I'll touch on at the end. Anyway, let's get to it. The Q990B is Samsung's flagship soundbar for 2022. It has the same 11.1.4 channels as its predecessor and comes in at a retail price of $17.99, which is $100 more than last year's. You get the main bar, side-firing sub, and 2 rear speakers. They've gone for a much improved look in my opinion, changing from the fabric cover, which looked great on day one but was a dust magnet from then on, to a nice plastic finish that is of similar quality to last year's LG. My second gripe with the Q950A was the stupid placement of the LED screen. Luckily, Samsung has had some common sense this year and placed it in the front like most other soundbars, but unfortunately it's not a super high quality screen, and to see it you really have to be straight in front. I'm surprised they didn't team up with JBL, considering Harman International, a subsidiary of Samsung, owns JBL and use the same screen as the 9.1. That bar has one of the nicest screens I've seen on a soundbar, but they didn't, and at the end of the day that may not matter to you, especially if you're pairing this with a Samsung TV, as the volume will be on screen and the TV remote will turn the bar on and off. Speaking of inputs, you get an HDMI eARC port, 2 HDMI inputs, and an optical. There's a USB port underneath, but it's only for software upgrades. The 4 buttons on top are for volume adjustment, input select, and microphone mute. In the box you get wall mounts for the main bar, power cables for all 4 units, a high-speed HDMI cable, and a slick new remote. The subwoofer has had a change in design. The overall size is pretty much the same, but they've taken away the fabric cover and added an acoustic lens over the driver to smoothen out the bass. The rear speakers have also been tweaked. Apart from the more rounded shape and full plastic build, they've raised the mounting hole higher up on the back, but still kept the same M6 thread size as the Q950A. I paired mine with the Mounting Dream speaker stands, and they work really well together. I've made a detailed video on these stands, which I'll link to down below. You could also mount these to the wall, but Samsung don't supply any brackets in the box, so instead get yourself a pair of universal ones to do the job. If you're planning on mounting a soundbar, then make sure you've got a solid wall space under your TV, and don't think about hanging it from the TV bracket due to its nearly 8 kilo weight. Pairing the Q990B with a TV 55 inches or larger would be best, as it comes in at a sizable 1200mm long. The new remote is a slimmed down version of last year's with a few extra buttons. Not only do you get the standard buttons for changing volume, individual channel levels, subwoofer output and sound modes, but they've taken the bass and treble options and put them under tone control, which means you don't have to click as many times to access them. A single click of the information button brings up the current source, and a second click will show you the audio format being used. I ended up using it all the time to make sure the content I was playing was in Atmos, a great improvement for better usability. So how does it sound for movies? Well, to undertake my testing, I used a soundbar in 3 different size rooms to get a better idea of its strengths and weaknesses. Having a flat ceiling around that 2 to 3 meter mark is most ideal for the Atmos performance. The sound is impressive for a soundbar, and it does a great job in elevating the soundstage, especially with Atmos content. The side speakers excel when placed in a room with walls at the same distance from the bar, and I eventually turned the side and top firing channels all the way up to give me an even wider soundstage. Dialogue has been improved over the Q950A, but the voice enhancement feature is still terrible and not worth turning on. Instead I went for the active voice amplifier on and boosted the center speaker to +3 for the best dialogue. The voice enhancement feature seems to increase the higher frequencies, but completely kills all the mids and lows. Samsung has taken leaps forward in the bass department. The acoustic lens does a really great job of smoothing out all the lower frequencies, and I'm super happy with its performance. I cranked it all the way up to +6 since I love deep thumping bass, and this soundbar was able to give me plenty. I was nervous that the neighbours were going to come round and tell me to turn it down, so I kept changing the volume to avoid that from happening. At one point when I was watching Dune, the glass doors were rattling so much that I had to pause the movie and take a break. Being able to add a second sub would be a cool feature to give us even more bass in larger rooms, but wouldn't be necessary for most people. Compared to the Q950A, the Q990B sub is a massive improvement. I found the previous model to be lacking in bass, so it's nice to know that Samsung have improved in this area. The rear speakers are very similar in performance to the Q950A, and that makes sense, as Samsung has already created a set of well-designed speakers. I didn't find the side-firing drivers from the rears to be that impressive in my 3 rooms, but that's not to say it won't help increase the rear soundstage in yours. You can play all the major audio formats from both Dolby and DTS, including Atmos and DTS:X, with Atmos being available through the Dolby True HD format when connected to a Blu-ray player or home media server. I tested all my movies in Atmos from an Apple TV connected directly to the soundbar and was thoroughly impressed with all its overhead sound effects. When the helicopters and 6 underground and transformers flew over, I definitely had a sense that they were nearing the ceiling. It also excelled with the Batman as he flies up through the spiral stairs, with the sound ending up much higher than the rest of the gunshots. If you're looking at buying the soundbar for a large room, you don't need to worry about volume. You get a range of 0 to 100, and I found it to be loud at 20%, and I couldn't go past 30% when playing off an Apple TV, which is insane. At those higher volumes, I didn't find the sound to be distorted, and I think that's because this bar has such a large volume range, so operating at under 30% is a piece of cake. In some of my other reviews and comparisons, I included a sound test as part of the video, but I needed to keep it around a couple minutes in length so it didn't extend the video too long. I also had an issue with YouTube degrading the audio quality, so to overcome these issues, I've put together a better recording device that helps to further simulate you sitting here in the room, and I've put together a downloadable sound test file that contains the recordings of the bar in 3 different size rooms with a variety of music and movie clips, to give you an idea of what it sounds like. If you'd like to grab it and give it a test with a pair of headphones, there'll be a link in the description. A good sign of a great system is when you're listening to music, you forget about the equipment in front of you and you're left enjoying the music for what it is. While I was testing the soundbar, I found myself wanting to play more and more of my favorite songs, forgetting that I was meant to be critiquing its performance. Most soundbars are fine playing music in the background when you're pottering around the house, but aren't the best when you're wanting to sit down and be completely captivated by the music. In some of my other soundbar tests, there's been something that wasn't quite right about the sound and would hold me back from giving my full attention. I can happily say that this soundbar was able to capture my attention just as good as a set of stereo speakers. Many soundbars struggle to give you good stereo separation because of the fixed distance between its drivers, but this is not an issue for the Q990B. The side-firing drivers team up with the left and right fronts to give you a soundstage that's far wider than the bar itself. The bass was tight, it came in at the right points for each piece and didn't overpower the vocals. Often when you push a subwoofer too hard, it'll get woolly and uncontrolled, but Samsung have done a great job of increasing the subwoofer's operating power, so when you push it hard, it stays tight and well defined, which is a great improvement over the previous model. I tested music in standard and adaptive modes, and there's a night and day difference between the two. I highly recommend you leave it in adaptive mode, as you'll get better everything: soundstage, bass, and vocals. Standard is far too centralized, whereas adaptive activates all of the drivers, even when listening to music recorded in stereo. Music in Dolby Atmos was exceptional. It not only had the spatial separation of stereo, but it took the sound to new heights. The background vocals in West Coast by OneRepublic were elevated much higher than the lead vocalist, which not only sounded awesome, but gave extra clarity to the main vocals. Soundbars without Atmos speakers try to send all the music straight towards you, but you'll miss out on all the extra details, and it muddies the sound because of the narrow soundstage. This soundbar's height channels give plenty of distance between the notes, which results in a very pleasing Atmos experience. I've given you songs from 7 different genres in the sound test to help prove this point. Playing Apple Music through an Apple TV was by far the best for both Atmos and stereo mixes, and I highly recommend you give it a go if you've got the equipment. Samsung have included a new mode with this year's soundbar. Previously we had the Q950A that had the rear speakers, and a cheaper model, the Q900A, that came without rear speakers. The Q990B has a new surround speaker mode, which enables the user to choose where they'd like to place the rear speakers. I know that some of you don't have the space behind your couch, or wouldn't benefit from the surrounds because you mainly watch content that isn't in 5.1 or Atmos. With this new mode, you can position the rears to the left and right of the main bar, which widens the front soundstage. I prefer to use them as rear speakers because the front soundstage is already really wide, but I can see Samsung testing this new feature and potentially giving us the option to purchase an extra pair and have 4 satellite speakers, 2 in the front and 2 in the rear with next year's soundbar. If they did, it would be the soundbar version of Sony's A9 home theater system, and I, like many of you, would be very happy about that. The other major feature was the inclusion of wireless Dolby Atmos. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to get my hands on a 2022 Samsung TV before doing this review, so I couldn't give it a test, but just know that you'll be able to do away with an HDMI cable if you pair this soundbar with select Samsung TVs. The SmartThings app is very similar to previous generations and gives you the same settings as the remote, but much easier to see and interact with. The main menu is well laid out and gives you important options right from the home screen. They've finally added individual channel changing, which I'm thrilled about. It's another aspect I discussed last year, and it's nice to see that Samsung have listened to feedback and improved in those areas. The auto EQ sends a tone out of the sub for a couple minutes, and its microphones will calibrate the system based on the sound response of the room. I found the improvement to be alright. It's nothing close to Sonos's TruePlay tuning, but I'd still recommend using it. Let's put it this way, it doesn't make the sound any worse. SpaceFit Sound claims to scan your room and change the sound profile to best suit the space. I didn't find that much of a difference in my room, but that's not to say it wouldn't improve in yours. Active voice amplifier makes sure voices can be heard over other sounds in the room, but for my type of watching, it didn't make a difference either. Out of the 4 sound modes, adaptive is definitely the one to go for. Standard is really bad out of the box, but allows you to tweak a 7-band EQ under the Advanced tab. All the sound modes except standard will upmix everything to 11.1.4 channels, so if you're not getting any sound from the rear speakers, then change the sound mode from standard to one of the other options. If you want to connect to a TV through an optical cable, you can set the soundbar up to change the volume from the TV remote. Check out page 11 of the user manual for more info. If your TV has a standard ARC connection and you plan on using the soundbar in conjunction with an Apple TV to get Atmos, then know that turning on the Apple TV will also turn on the soundbar and switch it to the HDMI input, which is awesome and creates a seamless user experience. This feature opens the soundbar up to being a great option for pairing with an older TV or even a projector, as you don't need a TV with an eARC port to get Atmos. There were 2 main issues I came across with this soundbar. The first is very minor, but when you're going in and out of the SmartThings app, it'll take up to 20 seconds to reconnect to the soundbar because it loses connection with the servers. I'm not sure why the Samsung servers have to get involved when changing the soundbar settings, but it can get very frustrating after it happens a few times. It'll also take a second between each setting change, which gets old very fast. With the model I purchased, I still found myself with the issue of the rear speakers disconnecting. This happens when they're placed too far away, near a metal object, or someone stands in between the bar and the rear speakers. I mentioned this in my Q950A review, and unfortunately I have to do it again. For the 2023 version, it'd be nice if Samsung used a stronger transmission system, so it's no longer a weak point. Let me know in the comments if you're experiencing the same issue. On a more positive note, here's the settings that I use for my room and personal taste. Adaptive sound mode on all the time. SpaceFit sound, active voice amplifier and auto EQ on, bass and treble set at 0, and bass enhancement on. For the channels I maxed out everything except the center and woofer, which were both set to +3. To finish off, I had the rear speakers set as rear and virtual surround sound set to off. Use those as a guide if you want, and then tweak it to suit your liking. So where does this leave us? Should you buy this soundbar, the Q950A, or neither? I think the Q990B is a really great option. The change from the cloth to premium plastic, moving the screen to the front, much better subwoofer performance, and better overall sound make it a top-notch upgrade over the Q950A. If you've already got the Q950A and are happy with its performance, then I wouldn't bother swapping it out. But if you're in the market, and even if the Q950A is a couple $100 cheaper, I'd still go for the Q990B because of the overall sound quality boost. I think it's worth it for a more polished product. If you want to know how it sounds up against other bars, then let me know in the comments below. But before you do, I know I'll get asked this question, so I'll quickly give you my thoughts. Can I buy the Q910B, save a bit of money, and get a similar experience? Now I haven't heard the 910, so I can't give you sound recommendations, but I have heard those rear speakers before, and to be quite honest, they're much worse than the 990s. You also have to cable them to the little wireless box, so aesthetically it'll look much worse, especially when wall mounting, and the rears don't have Atmos drivers. It's got a subwoofer that looks like the one from last year, as it doesn't have the acoustic lens, so you won't get the same awesome bass performance of the 990. If you can find the Q950A at a similar price to the Q910, I'd buy the Q950A, as it'll most likely give you a better sound performance. With that, in my next video I'll be putting the Q990B up against the Sonos Arc, which you can watch here once it comes out. Anyway, that's all from me. See you guys soon.